An old one-on-one client reached out to me and I was like, hey, what's up? And he's like, not so good. I'm kind of stuck. I don't feel like I'm in a good place right now, but I wanted to reach out and kind of talk about it. Took on some investor money so that we could deploy them into certain tests, and it didn't really go so well.
Were the investors aware of the risk reward profile?
They both understood logically, but he didn't prepare himself for how that would feel. When those hits come, you should... Raising funds and taking on other people's capital can give you a lot of opportunities, but what it can also do is add a lot of pressure and possibly hinder your performance. On today's podcast, I want to share a recent conversation I had with an old one-on-one client that actually his performance started to tank after he received these new opportunities, and the workarounds we figured out and how he could get back on track and perform at his best. So there's going to be some things here that are a bit more abstract and some things that are very tactical tools that you can use regardless of if you're raising funds or not, but you're dealing again with high stakes and really want to achieve big things. So on that note, welcome to today's podcast, Alex.
Thanks, Itamar. Pleased to be here.
Cool, man. So I want to share the conversation. This was an old one-on-one client and he reached out to me and I was like, hey, what's up? And he's like, not so good. So I asked him what happened. And he said, well, recently, you know how I wanted to grow things. So I took on outside money, took on some investor money so that we could deploy them into certain tests. And it didn't really go so well. Like I had a small couple little things that succeeded, but then on the overall, it didn't go so well. And we started spending a bunch of cash. Eventually, I felt so uncomfortable with it that I just wanted to kind of bail out of it. So I decided the best thing I could do is to return the money and take a personal hit myself. So I'm kind of stuck. I don't feel like I'm in a good place right now, but I wanted to reach out and kind of talk about it. And it was rough to see him because I know how skilled he is, and I know that he could definitely have crushed it, so to speak. But there was something in his head that caused him to underperform. So I had about a 30-minute conversation with him that by the end of it, he was first, he was very relieved because he was like, okay, this isn't a problem. This is how I dealt with it. It wasn't me. It was just a strategy I deployed psychologically in order to deal with this pressure. And also he felt excited. And he was like, you know what? This was just that. Let me get back on the horse. I want to get right back into it. And he ended up calling the investors, got the money back. They were very gracious about it. And now he's on his way, so to speak. So any thoughts before we get rolling?
I guess my first question, maybe I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, would be, were the investors aware of the risk reward profile? That they
Yes.
didn't believe that I put money in and it's absolutely guaranteed it's going to be a 10xer or whatever at some point in the future. It could go to zero, it could be big.
Yeah.
And was he aware of that risk reward? And if both parties were aware, is this more of an emotional reaction to performance not going so well, as opposed to, well, we both knew the risk we were taking, and it turns out it's less than ideal. But
so they both knew the risk and they both understood logically that there's going to be some volatility there, that it might not happen at once, so to speak. It's not going to be an immediate risk or immediate payoff. There's going to be a bunch of tests that will be run. One of them might succeed, one of them might not. It might take a bit longer, whatever it may be. Now, both the investors, they're obviously savvy investors, and this individual, he's an entrepreneur who's been in the game for quite some time. So they both knew this. Now, to kind of get into the first point, the first mistake, though, was that, again, I'm saying this is a mistake from a performance standpoint, is that he did not prepare himself for the possibility that the first couple tests might go wrong and how that will feel. So this is the big thing. He knew that might go, like logically that might happen, but he didn't prepare himself for how will I react emotionally, especially he's someone with super high integrity, super high ethics. How would I react emotionally to losing other people's money? And because he didn't prepare for that possibility emotionally, when those emotions hit, it really blindsided him. And this is something we talk about very often, that when emotions blindside us, things start to spiral. But if we can anticipate them, it can go a really long way.
That's something which you've done a great job at in your counsel, is preparing your clients for the emotional costs, or at least a logical analysis of what might happen past this point, and how do I prepare for any one of those outcomes ahead of time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Remember when we did the attempted Trump assassination breakdown? I got an entrepreneur came up to me at a conference afterwards, and he said the most interesting thing from that whole breakdown was when you guys said, well, his security agents, they weren't emotionally prepared for how it would feel like to try to get him to duck down, and then having someone who's your superior tell you, no, I want to put my hand up and I want to stand up. They didn't prepare for that emotional thing. And he's like, I don't never do that with my employees. So I never prepare for the kind of the backlash or the negative that might come from that. And I think this is a big part, is that, it's very nice to say, just think positively and just handle it positively. But I think what's more impactful, more effective than positive thinking is resilience. And a big part of resilience is accepting that there's going to be some kind of suck there. And a big thing when starting a project is, people tell you, oh, just think about all the great things that can come of it. Think about it, it'll pump you up, it'll fill up your sails with wind, blah, 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 blah. That's true. Now, if you can also, on top of that, say, what are all the potential costs that I'm going to have to pay along the way? Emotionally, financially, lifestyle, whatever it may be. And say, okay, I can anticipate that and I accept it. When those hits come, you'll be prepared for them. They won't just blindside you, knock you off course, and send you downward in a spiral, which is unfortunately what happened to him. He did not anticipate that, and because of that, it blindsided him. And it started this downward spiral where all of a sudden these thoughts that he had in his head of, am I being a bad person because I'm wasting their money? What will they think about me? All these kind of things, he was trying to process them while already in a compromised emotional state. And when you do that, when you try to process emotions in a compromised emotional state, bad things usually happen. And on the flip side, if he would have, before he started this, he would have sat down and been like, you know what? Here are some possibilities. We might lose, the first 10 tests might come out duds. They might waste a lot of money. And I can anticipate that when that happens, because I know my biggest values are taking care of others and making sure that everything's ethical, I will feel, there will be a voice in my head, lower level me will try to scream out, you're doing something wrong. But I recognize that's just nonsense, because like you said, I know the risk parameters, the investors know the risk parameters. We understand that this is part of the game. I need to accept that while I'm trying to round second base or whatever, and be lower level me will try to chirp at me, and I need to ignore it. It can make all the difference. And I think that's how you build resilience, and not just positive thinking.
So if I summarize this, maybe my words aren't accurate, but if I'm trying to level up in life, I'm going for the Super Bowl, I'm going to raise funds. There's something which I'm doing which is novel and significant in nature. Do you think that we tend to have either a bias or blind spot to focusing on what we perceive to be the positives? Like, if I create this company that does $1 billion in revenue, then I am rich and successful. And we kind of get blindsided by the fact that that's probably going to come with a lot of litigation and, board and, all the other sort of consequences that come with that. Is there a psychological, is there like a protection mechanism? How would you define that bias that tends to creep in with people? That we tend to look through rose-colored glasses into the future and think, when I have X, this will be great.
It's a great question, because I don't know how to define it. And this is where you're actually usually better than me at language patterns. But it just, it's why the grass always seems greener, because we just see the upside. It's why shiny objects exist, because you just see the shine in them, not all the shit on the bottom of it. I had a conversation with a friend recently, and he has a pretty big business. And he was telling me, dude, I would love to have your business. My business is much smaller than him, but he's like, it's much more cash flow. There's less volatility in it. And I'd be like, I'd like to have your business. There's bigger overall revenues. There's some cool things that come with it. And we're like, yeah, but you don't know my challenges. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't know my challenges. And it's just part of it. And I don't have a specific term for it, but it's just understanding that on the outlook things, you always just look at the positive. We don't see all the stress. And because we don't see all the stress, again, we get blindsided. I think this is something my mentor, Colonel G from the Mossad, used to say all the time, that we're much more capable than we give ourselves credit for. But in order to reach that capability, we have to prepare ourselves. Like if I tell you, like, Alex, listen, I'm going to punch you in the stomach, all right? So I need you to brace. You'll be able to take a much, much stronger punch than if I just catch you off guard.
Sure.
And you'll probably still stay my friend as well, you know? But it's like, if we don't prepare for these punches, it's going to create problems. And I think that's the big thing first off. He didn't prepare for that psychological gut punch.
Right.
And just us talking through it a little bit, all of a sudden does create a lot of release, because he's like, man, this wasn't actually an issue. It was just an emotional reaction that I had while I was already emotionally reactive and unprepared. And that's why it felt like such a big deal. And that already created some release. That's point one. Any last thoughts on that?
Is there a balance point between having, if I have zero understanding of what are the potential costs or the challenges I might experience emotionally to achieving this, having absolute zero is probably not good, because you're going to be very reactive and surprised, and then you're going to be emotionally trying to think through the feelings. Is there a point where you have too much fear or concern, and it might be inaccurate? So there's kind of this weird Goldilocks zone of accuracy that we're sort of aiming for. Because I've had some of those conversations with people who they do the opposite. And they amplify the lowest probability, most extreme potential bad consequences, and they use that as a reason not to move forwards.
It's a really great question. And I think also, like what you said, it's how you use it. Are you using it as a reason not to move forward, or are you using it like, okay, I might get messed up here a little bit? You know what I mean? And again, and I think it's also, there is some wisdom there. Like, you know, everybody wants different things in life. Everybody wants to take on different goals. And if, again, not extreme, worst case, very improbable scenario, but if you're saying this is a probable scenario that I'm going to have to go through this level of challenge or pain or whatever it may be, and you preemptively say, you know what, that's actually something I don't want to take on, it could save you actually a lot of time and effort. Just getting to, you know, the almost finish line, but not crossing it, because you didn't preemptively accept that this is going to be the price of it. And it's something that I see a lot of people actually do. They don't own the fact that they don't want to do something. So they start doing it, and then when it gets to get to the hard part, all of a sudden they don't do it. And all they do is they waste effort. Now, there might have been something else, a different project, a different opportunity, whatever it may be, that is more realistic for them to take on. And it could be a general thing, just in life in general, or it could be in their situation. So for example, a lot of the guys that I work with are new fathers. And a lot of times it's being realistic and be like, okay, you are now going to be sleep deprived for the next 3 months as you guys are kind of figuring this out. You're also going to readjust your marriage with your wife, because there's going to be different circumstances. There's going to be a lot of things you have to figure out. So in this time, do you think this is something that you should take on at this level? Or should we just aim maybe a tier next to it, but that you can absolutely accept this is going to be the price, this is going to be the cost, I can crush it? What do you think? So it's about kind of knowing thyself as well. Does that answer it in a bit of a roundabout way?
It does. And I think that the challenge with a lot of entrepreneurs will be that we live in a vacuum of our own head, and it's not always obvious to how to challenge ourselves, where to pick up on our biases and blind spots, which again is just the value of working with a performance coach like yourself, in terms of having someone in close quarters who can see behind the curtains a little bit about what's going on and have those prompts and be able to read our responses to that to help us navigate that process. Because I think it's very, very difficult to do alone, because you're kind of like the poison and the antidote all in one. Like you have the keys to resolving this, but you're hamstrung because somewhere within you is the bias and blind spot which is holding you back.
Yeah, and I think also ego to add to that. So ego, for example, again, with the new fathers, a lot of time it's this ego, like I don't want to all of a sudden not push as hard as I've pushed. But the lay of the land is different. So you having the same strategy when the lay of the land has changed doesn't make any logical sense. It's an ego thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally makes sense.
Right. But like kind of moving on to what you were saying about tactics. And this is the big tactic that we actually like used with him to change everything, was shifting the goal from an external one to an internal one. So from my experience, when whenever I've wanted to achieve something, I've felt a lot of pressure. When I've looked at something as an opportunity to become better, I perform much better. So for example, the simplest example is in jiu-jitsu. When I really wanted to win a competition, all of a sudden, every little thing that got thrown at me as a glitch, or, I didn't have my exact time to warm up, my water bottle was whatever it may be, all of a sudden that put on pressure, like, shit, I want to win this, and now I have this going against me, or this is hard. Why is this getting in the way? And it would add more pressure and a little bit of frustration. When instead of that, I said, you know what? I'm going to perform at my best today, regardless of what's thrown at me. When those things happen, it wasn't an issue because it wouldn't get in the way, so to speak. It was just, okay, great. I get to learn how to perform my best, even when I didn't have time to warm up. Even when the judges try to rob me because I was a gringo in Brazil, whatever it may be, I get to just practice on that. And that's what we shifted for him. That his goal was like, we want to hit a certain amount of ARR. And because of that, like the losses and the pressure from investors, all these added things, they added so much pressure. When in reality, that goal, him thinking about it, it didn't really add much value because he already had the skill set and the strategy to get there. So him focusing on it, it wasn't helpful. It wasn't like, okay, from the get-go, let's focus on what do we actually want to do. He's already past that. So when we shifted the focus to, I want to be able to operate with a sense of strategic calm while deploying investors' money, he's like, ooh, that's interesting because, I could see how that capability, if I wanted to focus on that would help me so much in life in various ways and ongoing in my career. And just shifting the focus of, is it just a goal or is it to become the kind of person who can achieve these things? It reduces so much of the pressure that causes underperformance.
Your quote of, when you focus on the target, or when you focus on the trophy, you miss the target.
Definitely not my
I'm claiming it as your quote.
Yeah.
So I think that quote makes a lot of sense, and I think there's a well-laid history of high-performance athletes moving into business and doing well. And I know that people have tried to summarize that as being, well, maybe it's the mindset of like never give up and so on. And I don't think it's necessarily work ethic, and genetics, I'm assuming, in business sort of don't matter. What I believe it is that athletes, we typically focus on the work. We focus on the actions. I'm going to the gym.
The process.
I'm doing this thing. We focus on the process. And the goal is to, of course, the goal is to improve in jiu-jitsu or lift heavier weight. Yeah. We know that the goal is improvement, but we focus much more on what are the actions I'm doing today? How do I develop this feedback loop from those actions and improve my actions tomorrow?
Yeah.
And just sort of trust that improvement will come. But if we focus on the improvement, then we lose sight of the actions that are actually required to actually move us forward. So I wanted to share that sort of athletic analogy for business, because I find that any time that I'm in a state of anxiety or ambiguity, it's when I've defaulted to focus on the outcome.
Yeah.
And I instantly have clarity and move things forward. Also bring it down and say, okay, great. I know that I want, more of the thing, but these are the actions that I can take today to move me forwards. It's become a healthy little tripwire for me anytime I find myself thinking like that to bring me back into what can I pragmatically do today to move this forwards.
Yeah, and I'll say on top of that, for me, it's challenging to ask myself, what are the actions I should be taking to move forward? Because when I ask myself what are the things I should be doing, I still get in my own way, so to speak, like how you're saying. My blind spots, my biases still get in their own way. And an interesting little trick to override that, to sidestep that, is to ask, what would somebody who would want to achieve this thing, what would they be doing? What would they be thinking and acting?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing that for him, it was like, okay, it's not about me achieving the goal and what that will mean about me if we hit a certain amount of ARR. It's just like, oh, how would somebody who wants to operate calmly while deploying this amount of cash into the marketplace, how would they act? Can I become that kind of person? The stakes all of a sudden felt much lower, and paradoxically, everybody thinks, you just need to higher stakes, more pressure, performance. Like, it actually helped him perform better. And before the podcast, this is kind of leading to a question you asked. Like, how do you ask it exactly? Can you remind me?
Are there personalities that actually perform better with that external pressure? So, for that client, it was the raising of capital that changed the environment he was operating under, and then he sort of suffered the emotional consequences that things weren't working out necessarily on schedule or according to plan, and so the change of the environment was there was external capital.
Yeah.
Have you seen clients who improved? Do they become more focused on their actions and less focused on the outcome? Do they have a higher degree of accountability or just speed or clarity of thought when the pressure from external is increased?
I think it's really dependent on the individual and where they are. We constantly bring up this performance pressure bell curve. So like where they are in it naturally or circumstantially. So if they were naturally in a lower part where they honestly, more pressure would have helped them perform than getting it from an external source, that's the kick in the butt they need all of a sudden.
Mm.
And a lot of times you see this when people don't have internal pressure anymore. For example, after an exit, like I'm just kind of tinkering around, kind of messing around. All of a sudden they raise funds. They're like, oh, I actually have to do this now because there's external accountability as well, not just my own internal needs. And all of a sudden they perform much better because of that.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, when they already put a lot of pressure on themselves, was the case with this individual. And that's why I said at the beginning, he had this really, really high level of like, in order for me to be ethical, I have to do this. And this is really important for me to be ethical and to make sure everyone is treated right. He already put a lot of pressure on himself for that. That's why in his case, removing some pressure was the thing that'll get him back into that optimal, that peak performance zone. So I think it's very circumstantial and individual.
And hence, I think the value of performance coaching, because there is not a one size fits all. This is not a David Goggins sort of motivational speech of just get up and grind harder or just push through the emotional states. There's bespoke strategies based on bespoke circumstances and bespoke individuals, and you really need someone who, at a high level, can identify what your constraint is. Is it pressure or lack of pressure? And I guess engineer those things on your behalf or work with you to engineer them.
Yeah, and I think also, like, truly, there's a lot of people who just need Goggins. They're at a certain point in that bell curve, and a lot of people just need that kick in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, they also need that kick in the ass just for a little bit. They need to get back on the horse, whatever it may be. And to kind of like go into the next point, kind of pigging back off what you currently said, it's also about understanding what the actual bottleneck is. So his focus, he thought the bottleneck, the real issue that he wanted to focus on was he needs to be more skillful and he needs to focus on this goal of ARR. He thought that was the goal. When in reality, the actual bottleneck in his success was his ability to tolerate amplified accountability and the pressure that creates. Because he wasn't aware of that, he wasn't able to focus his resources on dealing with that. How do I get myself to not be emotionally reactive and just stay calm and logical? Because if he was calm and logical, he definitely has the skill set to, again, there's risk parameters, there's likelihoods, whatever, but to actually like give himself the best opportunity to succeed. However, because he wasn't cognizant of the fact that that was his bottleneck on success and not just getting the company to grow, because he already has that ability, he faltered. He was blindsided by that unexpected challenge because he wasn't aware of it. And I think it's a big part. It just being aware, what is the actual bottleneck? Is it the company growth or is it my ability to stay calm and help the company grow? And a lot of times, when you read about these very successful CEOs, a common trait is that they're able to stay calm under pressure. Sometimes you hear about people like Steve Jobs, they just think so fast and it's amazing their IQ. But a lot of times they just are able to deploy their full IQ because they can stay calm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a big thing for the listeners at home to ask yourself, when I'm operating from a calm level, when I'm rational and strategic, could I scale this thing? If the answer is like no, because I do not know how to grow a sales team, I don't have that knowledge, seek that out. If the answer is yes, but sometimes I feel frantic, or all of a sudden I recognize that I was acting in a ways where I thought, why did I do that? Or what was I thinking? Then there's probably some emotional issues that's causing pressure and causing you to not perform at your best. So I think it's about identifying the bottleneck. And that was for him. He recognized, you know what, the bottleneck actually wasn't me focusing on the business tactics. It was me focusing on myself. Because if I would have had me of the same amount of knowledge, same amount of business skill, but just a calm version of me, I would have excelled at this.
It's a really powerful insight, and I think it's especially applicable to entrepreneurs in the changing state of business that we're currently going through as the AI revolution starts to take shape.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of entrepreneurs coming across similar circumstances, whether it's injections of capital or a radical reorganization of the org structure or anything else, and having the clarity, the confidence, the capabilities to actually navigate that, I think is massively improved by having someone like you in their corner and advising them, because defining those constraints in when I do business consultancy, etc. It's the number one thing I speak to, and it's profound how many people can't answer that question. Like, what is your constraint? Yeah. And they go, I don't know. It's like, great. Well, until we do know, we are unable to remove it. So let's spend all of our energy focusing on like completing this sentence. My constraint is nothing else matters until we can actually identify it.
Yeah, and I think that's perhaps needs to be the summarizing question we'll get back to in this. But like, what is my constraint? I think what you said there is really great. Before we kind of get to the summarizing question, one last kind of thing that we used for him. So up until now, like during that conversation, we figured out a couple of things. First off, that he wasn't proactively prepared for the emotion, for the downside and how that would feel. He didn't proactively like prepare and accept that. That's one. He didn't expect that and accept it. Two is that he had an external goal instead of an internal goal. When that internal goal of focusing on how could I learn to operate calmly while putting a lot of funds into the marketplace, how that could have given him a much more calm and all of a sudden be like, this is a great opportunity. Whenever challenges came along the way, or when there were downturns, like, this is exactly where what I needed. This is what I want in order to learn how to be a better performer, instead of being like, crap, why is this happening? It's getting me away from this goal of ARR. 3 was understanding the bottleneck of what it actually was. Instead of saying we need more business knowledge, it was, I need to be able to operate calmly. That's the actual bottleneck. Now, the last thing is that I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode. After a certain point when things went south, he decided he didn't want to play the game anymore. And he told the missus that, and she told him, you know what? Yeah, you do look like you're very off. You're not enjoying this anymore. This isn't serving you. And he told himself, you know what? I'm just going to close this deal. And he took a personal hit. He returned the investor money and also refunded the loss from his personal finances, which shows you the ethics of this person, so to speak. But the problem was that was not a great strategy. His missus was great in helping him identify, hey, something does feel off with you right now, but she doesn't have a background in business. And what's unfortunate is that he didn't have as a default to say, when I recognize that I'm emotionally compromised, like my missus has pointed out, I have 3 to 5 people that I can call. He only called me afterwards, for example, instead of in the moment. And I think having just a default behavior of saying, when I recognize in some way that I'm emotionally compromised, or that somebody tells me, hey, you're really off your game, that knows me, as a default, to call someone you trust. Have like 3 to 5 names you can say I can call, whether it's a mastermind buddy, whether it's a forum mate, whatever it may be. Just somebody that you know that could be like, hey man, I get what you're doing right now. I get it feels like the world is imploding. Let's not do anything reactive that's not going to serve you. And if you don't have that in your mental toolbox of 3 to 5 people you can call the default action before you make a big decision, especially when you're emotionally compromised, it's a shame, because it could save you both a lot of headache and a lot of finances as well.
Great analysis and great advice.
Yeah. All right. So the kind of recap it, how Alex said is, what's your constraint? If you don't know that, you really can't move forward. And the way I want to go about this from a bit of a different angle is that if you're feeling really stressed out from a goal you're trying to pursue, list it out and then rewrite it as an internal goal for the kind of person it can help you become if you achieve it. It's a very weird psychological trick, but all of a sudden, the goal doesn't feel as threatening anymore. It's not like if I don't hit it, what will this mean? But it's just like, how can I focus on becoming that kind of person? So for my example, I'm not focusing right now on how to getting the book to be as big as possible. That's not what's going on in my head every day. But instead of it, I'm trying to ask myself, how would someone who wants a book to really blow up think and act? That little change in dynamics can create a big jump in performance. And for my old client, just going through those things, and first off, preemptively accepting that there's going to be downsides and how they will feel, changing the narrative to from an external goal to an internal goal, kind of like what I'm doing with the book, being able to recognize what the actual bottleneck is, and just those 3 to 5 allies kind of default rule, it made a big change for him. Since then, he's talked to the investors because he was so overly ethical and he explained to them what happened. They were more than happy to actually give him back the money, give him back the funds and try again. And he's able to move forward. And I think it's a big thing. It's like, if you're in a challenge, reach out to a friend, but also like, don't let yourself get caught off guard by emotions. Whenever you're trying to do something big, absolutely think positively of what it will get you. And at the same time, have some, like, let's call it preemptive resilience by anticipating the suck and saying, you know what, this is going to happen. It doesn't mean that something's wrong. It's just a part of the process.
So,
and on that note, we'll leave you guys for today. Thank you for listening.